I will never forget that night. It was the night the forest came alive, and we heard whispers that no human should ever hear. By the time the sun rose, 4 people were missing, 2 were found, and the rest of us carried the scars forever. My name is Obinna, and this is a story I never wanted to tell. But the elders said we should speak about it, so others might learn from it. This happened many years ago in our village, Umuk, a small Igbo community surrounded by thick forest. The people of Umuk respected the forest, but we also feared it. The elders always told us, do not enter the whispering forest after dark. The forest is in our village and it is called the Whispering Forest, because, at night, strange sounds came from it, soft murmurs, like people talking but with no meaningful words that we could understand. Some said it was the spirits. Others believed it was the wind. But everyone agreed on one thing, the forest was not a place for the living after sunset. Uchenna was the strongest young man in the village, but he was also proud and loved to show off. One evening, as we sat around the big fire in the village square, the moon was bright, and everyone was laughing and telling stories. Then Uchenna stood up and said, all of you are cowards. Who among you here is brave enough to follow me into the whispering forest tonight? The laughter stopped. Everyone stared at him, shocked. No one dared to respond. I whispered to my friend Adebi, is he mad? The elders will punish him if they find out. But Uchenna didn't care. He laughed loudly and said, I will prove to you that there's nothing in the forest. Who will join me? At first, no one moved. Then, to my shock, Adebi raised her hand. I go, she said. I grabbed her arm. Ada, are you crazy? I hissed. But she just smiled and whispered, Obinna, I'm tired of being afraid. Maybe Uchenna is right. Maybe it's just stories. Before I knew it, 3 others volunteered, Amoka, the girl who always wanted to prove she was braver than the boys, Chike, Uchenna's closest friend, and me. Yes, me. I didn't want to go, but I couldn't let Adebi face the forest alone. We left just as the fire died down, carrying small lanterns and sticks for protection. The elders had gone to bed, so no one stopped us. The whispering forest looked different at night. The tall trees seemed to move, their branches like arms reaching out to grab us. Uchenna led the way, laughing and making jokes. See. Nothing to fear, he said, kicking a rock. But then we heard it, the whispers. At first, it was faint, like the rustling of leaves. But soon, it grew louder. Chike stopped and said, did you hear that? Uchenna rolled his eyes. It's just the wind. Keep moving. But the whispers didn't stop. They seemed to follow us, growing louder with every step. Adebi grabbed my hand. Obinna, she whispered, this doesn't feel right. I nodded, my heart pounding. But Uchenna refused to turn back. After walking for what felt like hours, we reached a small clearing. In the center was a tree unlike any I had ever seen. It was huge and twisted, with roots that seemed to claw at the ground. And then we saw it. A small pot, covered in strange symbols, sat at the base of the tree. Amoka gasped. What is that? Uchenna grinned. It's just an old pot. Probably left here by the villagers long ago. But Adebi shook her head. No, Uchenna. This is not normal. Let's leave it alone. Uchenna ignored her. He walked up to the pot and picked it up. See. Nothing to be afraid of. As soon as he lifted the pot, the whisper stopped. The silence was deafening. Then a deep, growling voice filled the air. Who dares to disturb the forest? We froze. The ground beneath us began to shake, and the trees seemed to close in. Uchenna dropped the pot and screamed, run. We ran as fast as we could, but the forest seemed endless. The whispers returned, louder and angrier. Amoka tripped and fell. I turned back to help her, but she screamed, go. Don't stop. I pulled her up, and we kept running. Suddenly, Chike was gone. One moment he was behind me, and the next, he vanished into the shadows. When we finally stumbled out of the forest, only 3 of us remained, me, Adeebi, and Amoka. Uchenna and Chike were nowhere to be found. We told the elders what happened. They were furious and terrified. "You have brought a curse upon us," they shouted. The next day, a search party went into the forest. They found Uchenna and Chike, but they were not the same. Their eyes were blank, and they could not speak. That was the last time anyone dared to enter the Whispering Forest. The elders performed rituals to appease the spirits, and Uchenna and Chike slowly recovered, but they never spoke about what they saw. I still hear the whispers sometimes, in my dreams. And every time I pass the edge of the forest, I remember the voice. Who dares to disturb the forest? The next morning, the elders of the village gathered. They were the oldest and wisest men and women, people who had lived through countless seasons. They sat under the Eudora tree, their faces serious. Elder Okonkwo, the oldest of them, raised his hand to silence the murmuring crowd. "Obinna, Adeebi, Amoka," he called. "Come forward and tell us everything." We walked to the center of the square, trembling. I could see Uchenna and Chike sitting on mats nearby. Their bodies were stiff, and their faces looked empty, as though their souls were missing. Adeebi spoke first. She described the journey, the strange whispers, the twisted tree, and the pot. She told them how Uchenna had lifted the pot, and how everything changed after that. Elder Okonkwo's face darkened. "This is serious. That pot belongs to the Ajofia, the spirits who guard the forest. You have disturbed their sacred ground." Another elder, Mama Nena, shook her head. "We warned you all never to go into the forest. Now the whole village will suffer." The crowd gasped. People began to argue. "It's not fair. We didn't go into the forest. Why should we suffer because of Uchenna's foolishness? They must fix what they've broken." Elder Okonkwo raised his hand again, and the crowd fell silent. "The spirits are angry," he said. "We must calm them before they take more lives. Obinna, Adeebi, and Amoka, you must return to the forest and make things right." My heart sank. Return to the forest? I couldn't believe my ears. Adeebi stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Elder, we cannot go back. The forest is alive. It does not want us there." But Elder Okonkwo shook his head. "You must. Only those who disturb the spirits can ask for forgiveness." Before we left, the Dibia, the spiritual priest, gave us charms and told us what to do. "When you reach the tree, kneel and offer these kola nuts to the spirits. Speak to them with respect. Do not run, no matter what happens." The whole village watched as we walked back to the edge of the forest. Uchenna and Chike were carried behind us, still silent and unresponsive. The elders believed their presence was necessary for the spirits to release them. As soon as we entered the forest, the whispers began again. This time, they sounded angrier, louder, and closer. Amoka clutched her charm tightly. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, my hands trembling. "Just keep moving." The forest seemed darker than before. The trees swayed, even though there was no wind. Shadows danced around us, and I kept feeling like someone or something was watching us. When we reached the clearing, the twisted tree looked even more terrifying. Its branches stretched toward the sky pop like claws, and the pot was back in its place, as if it had never been touched. We knelt before the tree, just as the Dibia had instructed. Adeebi placed the kola nuts on the ground. "Great spirits of the forest," she said, her voice trembling, "we are sorry for disturbing your peace. Please forgive us." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the ground shook, and a voice boomed from the tree. "Why should we forgive you? Humans are greedy and foolish. You take what is not yours and bring destruction wherever you." I swallowed hard. "We were wrong," I said. "We didn't know the pot belonged to you. Please spare our village. We will never enter your forest again." The voice laughed, a deep and chilling sound. Words are easy. If you truly seek forgiveness, you must prove your sincerity. The ground opened, and 3 paths appeared before us. Each of you must choose a path, the voice said. If your heart is pure, you will return. If not, you will remain here forever. Adeobi went first. She stepped onto the middle path, her face pale but determined. The moment she entered, the path disappeared, and we could no longer see her. Next was Amoka. She chose the path on the right, whispering a prayer as she walked. Finally, it was my turn. I hesitated, my heart pounding. The left path was the only one left. I took a deep breath and stepped onto it. The forest around me changed instantly. I was no longer in the clearing. Instead, I stood in my family's compound. My mother was crying, holding my little sister. My father pointed at me, his face filled with anger. You brought shame to this family, he shouted. Because of you, we are cursed. I knew it wasn't real, but the words cut deep. I dropped to my knees, covering my ears. This isn't real, I whispered. It's just a test. The voice of the spirit echoed around me. Do you truly believe in your innocence? Or will you break under the weight of your guilt? I don't know how long I stayed there, but eventually, the vision faded, and I found myself back in the clearing. Adeobi and Amoka were there too, looking shaken but unharmed. The voice of the spirit returned. You have faced your fears and proven your sincerity. We will forgive you this time. But remember, the forest is not yours to take. Leave now and never return. The pot disappeared, and the whisper stopped. Uchenna and Chike suddenly gasped for air, their eyes clear. When we returned to Yumuk, the villagers cheered. The elders praised us for our bravery, but they also warned us never to forget the lessons we had learned. From that day, no one entered the whispering forest again. And even now, when I pass by its edge, I feel the eyes of the spirits watching, waiting for the next food to disturb their peace. Days passed after our return, and life in Yumuk began to return to normal. Uchenna and Chike seemed fine on the surface, but something about them had changed. They no longer laughed or played with the other youths. Instead, they spent hours sitting under the large ojuresai tree at the village edge, staring silently into the distance. One evening, during a community meeting, Adeobi noticed something strange. Have you seen Uchenna's shadow? She whispered to me. I glanced at Uchenna. The moon was full, and all of us cast long shadows across the ground. All of us, except Uchenna. His shadow was missing. Before I could say anything, an elder spoke up. The spirits may have forgiven us, but I fear the forest has left its mark. Watch them closely. Over the next few weeks, more strange things happened. Chike would suddenly wander into the forest edge, muttering words we couldn't understand. Villagers began to avoid Uchenna and Chike, calling them the Enyo Onya, the shadowless ones. One night, Adeobi and I decided to follow Chike. He left his hut just before midnight, his steps slow and deliberate. He walked straight to the forest and stopped at the edge. Chike, I whispered. Where are you going? He didn't answer. Instead, he turned to look at me, and for the first time, I saw his eyes. They glowed faintly, like dying embers. Obinna, Adeobi whispered, tugging my arm. Let's leave. Something is wrong. But before we could move, Chike spoke. His voice was not his own. It was deeper, more chilling. The spirits have not forgotten, he said. The debt is not yet paid. The next morning, we told the elders what we had seen. They called a meeting and decided to consult the Dibia again. When the Dibia arrived, he carried his Ofo stick and a calabash of sacred chalk. He drew symbols on the ground and began chanting. The air grew heavy, and the whispers returned, faint but unmistakable. The spirits are restless, the Dibia said. They spared the village, but they did not release the boys. Uchenna and Chike are caught between our ward and theirs. If we do not act, the spirits will take them and anyone else they choose. What must we do? Elder Okonkwo asked. The Dibia sighed. A sacrifice must be made. Someone must return to the forest and offer their life in exchange for the boys. The village fell into chaos. No one wanted to go back to the forest, let alone sacrifice their life. Arguments broke out, and people began accusing one another. "It's Uchena's fault," someone shouted. "Why should the rest of us pay for his pride?" But then, to everyone's surprise, Adebi stepped forward. "I will go," she said. My heart dropped. "Ada, no," I cried. She turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. "Obinna, this is the only way. If we don't do this, the spirits will destroy us all." The elders tried to stop her, but Adebi was determined. "The spirits want sincerity and courage," she said. "If I go willingly, they might spare the village." The next evening, Adebi and I stood at the forest edge. I refused to let her go alone. "If you're going, I'm going too," I said. She smiled faintly. "You're stubborn, Obinna." The Dibia performed another ritual, giving us a bundle of items, a white cloth, a piece of yam, and a feather. "Place this at the tree," he said. "Then speak from your heart. The spirits will decide the rest." We entered the forest for the third time. This time, the whispers were louder and angrier. Shadows moved between the trees, and the air felt colder. When we reached the clearing, the twisted tree seemed taller, its roots spreading like tentacles. The pot was gone, the ground around the tree glowed faintly, as if it were alive. Adebi placed the items on the ground and knelt. "Great spirits," she began, her voice steady, "I offer myself in exchange for my people. Take me, and let them live in peace." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the ground shook, and the deep voice returned. "You show courage, young one, but courage alone is not enough." The voice turned to me. What of you, boy? Will you watch her die her sacrifice? Or will you stand by her side? Without thinking, I knelt beside Adebi. "I will stay," I said. "If you take her, you must take me too." The forest fell silent. Then the voice laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the trees. "You have passed the test. True sacrifice is not about death, but about love and self. Go now, and remember, the forest does not forget." The glowing stopped, and the forest grew still. When we returned to the village, Uchenna and Chaik were waiting for us. Their shadows had returned, and their eyes were clear. The villagers gathered around, cheering and crying. Adebi and I were hailed as heroes, but we didn't feel like heroes. The experience had changed us. We knew we had been spared, but the spirit's warning stayed with us: the forest does not forget. Months after the ordeal, Adebi and I noticed something unsettling. While life in Umuk seemed normal, whispers about the forest lingered in hushed conversations. People spoke of strange footprints near the forest edge, of livestock disappearing without a trace. Uchenna and Chaik seemed healthy, but they were quieter than before. They no longer joined the village wrestling matches or played their flutes in the evening, and sometimes I would catch them staring at the forest with blank expressions, as if something unseen was calling them back. One day, Adebi came to me with a worried look. "Obinna," she said, "I think the spirits aren't finished with us." The next morning, the village woke up to find strange symbols drawn on the doors of 5 huts, including mine and Adebi's. They were drawn in a deep red color, and no one could explain where they came from. The Dibia was summoned again. He examined the marks and shook his head. "These are warnings," he said. "The spirits are watching. They may test us again." Fear spread through the village like wildfire. Some people packed their belongings and moved to neighboring villages. Others prayed and made offerings, hoping to appease the unseen forces. Adebi and I decided to visit Uchenna and Chaik to see if they knew anything. When we arrived at Uchenna's hut, we found him sitting on the floor, tracing one of the symbols in the dirt. "Uchenna," I said gently, "what are you doing?" He looked up at me, his eyes distant. "I see them in my dreams," he said. "The spirits. They show me these marks, and they tell me things. Adeabi frowned. What kind of things? They say the forest wasn't always cursed, Uchenna said. They say it became this way because of something our ancestors did. They want us to fix it. I felt a chill run down my spine. How? What do they want us to do? Uchenna shook his head. I don't know. But they won't stop until we do. We took Uchenna's words to the elders, who were visibly shaken. After a long silence, Elder Okonkwo spoke. There is an old story, he said. A story we rarely tell because it is filled with shame. He explained that many generations ago, the people of Umuk had been greedy and cruel. They had cut down sacred trees, killed animals needlessly, and ignored the warnings of the forest spirits. One day, they captured a traveler who passed through the village. The traveler claimed to be a messenger of the spirits, but the villagers mocked him and refused to let him go. That night, Elder Okonkwo continued, a great storm came. The forest swallowed half the village, and the traveler disappeared. Since then, the spirits have watched us, waiting for a chance to remind us of our arrogance. The elders agreed that the only way to make peace was to uncover the traveler's resting place and honor him with a proper ritual. The elders gave us a map, an old one that showed the village as it had been before the forest expanded. With Uchenna, Chaik, Adebi, and I leading the way, a group of us ventured into the forest. The journey was slow and terrifying. Every rustle of leaves felt like a warning. The deeper we went, the darker it became. The air felt heavy, as if the forest itself was watching us. After hours of searching, we found it, a clearing with a large stone in the center. The stone was covered in moss and vines, but when we cleared it, we saw carvings. They showed a man surrounded by trees, with the words, "Here lies the messenger. Honor him, and the forest will forgive." The dibia arrived with the items needed for the ritual: palm oil, kola nuts, white chalk, and a black goat. As he began the chants, the air grew colder. The tree swayed violently, though there was no wind. Suddenly, the ground split open, and a figure rose. It was the traveler, or what was left of him. His form was skeletal, his eyes glowing faintly. "Why have you come?" the figure asked, his voice echoing. "We have come to honor you," the dibia said, "and to ask for forgiveness for the sins of our ancestors." The figure stared at us for a long moment. Then he spoke. Forgiveness is not mine to give, but you have shown humility. You have acknowledged your wrongs. The spirits will decide. The ground trembled, and the whispers returned, louder than ever. The trees seemed to close in around us, and for a moment, I thought we wouldn't make it out alive. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The traveler disappeared, and the forest grew quiet. The dibia smiled. "It is done," he said. "The spirits have accepted our offering." When we returned to the village, the marks on the doors were gone, and the air felt lighter. Uchenna and Chaik were finally free of the forest hold, and the whispers stopped for good. The elders declared the clearing a sacred site, and every year, the villagers gathered there to honor the traveler and the spirits. Adeabi and I often visited the site, reflecting on everything we had been through. The forest had taught us many lessons about respect, humility, and the importance of listening to the warnings of the past. Months passed, and Umuk flourished. The harvests were bountiful, and the villagers celebrated peace restored. Yet, deep in my heart, I felt uneasy. Something didn't feel final. The forest no longer whispered, but it hadn't entirely quieted either. One night, as Adeabi and I sat outside my hut, she turned to me and said, "Do you ever feel like something is watching us?" I glanced at the forest, its edge barely visible under the moonlight. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But maybe it's just the memories." She shook her head. "No, it's more than that." The next morning, the first sign appeared: a hunter named Izemwa failed to return from the forest. By evening, a search party was organized, but all they found was his spear, broken and stained with something dark. The village fell into panic. The elders summoned the dibia once more. As he consulted his awful stick and cast cowries onto the floor, his face grew grim. "There is more to this story," he said, his voice trembling. "What do you mean?" Elder Okonkwo demanded. The dibia explained, "The traveler was a messenger, yes. But he was also a guardian, placed there to protect the balance between the human world and the spirits. When he forgave us, the balance shifted. Now, something else has taken his place, something darker." Yumuk fell into silence. The elders debated endlessly, but no one had a solution. Then, Uchenna spoke up. His voice was calm but firm. "I have seen it in my dreams," he said. "There is one more task. We must find the true source of the curse." Reluctantly, we gathered a group to enter the forest once more. Uchenna, Adeebi, Chaik, the dibia, and I formed the core group. Armed with lanterns, machetes, and prayers, we stepped into the shadows. The deeper we went, the stranger the forest became. The trees twisted unnaturally, their roots forming shapes that looked like faces. We heard faint cries, whether human or not, we couldn't tell. After hours of walking, we came upon a hidden cave. Its entrance was marked with the same symbols that had appeared on our huts. "This is it," Uchenna said. Inside the cave, the air was thick and suffocating. The walls were covered with carvings, scenes of villagers cutting down trees, capturing animals, and burning sacred lands. In the center of the cave stood a statue of the traveler, its eyes glowing faintly. The dibia examined the statue. "This is the heart of the curse," he said. "Our ancestors' actions disrupted the spirit's domain. This place is a reminder of their greed." As he spoke, the ground shook. The statue's eyes glowed brighter, and a voice boomed through the cave. "You have come seeking answers," it said. "But are you ready to face the truth?" The walls began to move, revealing scenes from the past. We saw our ancestors hunting needlessly, mocking the spirits, and destroying sacred trees. But then we saw something else, a group of villagers begging for forgiveness and performing rituals to make amends. The balance was never fully restored, the voice continued. "One last act remains." The voice explained that the villagers must rebuild the sacred grove destroyed by their ancestors. Only then would the curse be lifted. Uchenna turned to us. "We have to do it," he said. "It's the only way." We returned to the village with the dibia's guidance and began the work. The entire community joined in, planting trees, restoring the land, and making offerings to the spirits. Months later, the grove was restored. During the final ceremony, the air grew still, and the forest seemed to glow with life. The voice returned, softer this time. "You have honored the past," it said. "The balance is restored. Go now, and remember, respect is the foundation of peace." The forest grew quiet, and for the first time in generations, it felt welcoming. Life in Yumuk entered a new era. The village thrived, and the forest became a place of reverence rather than fear. Uchenna and Chaik returned to their old selves, and Adeebi and I grew closer than ever. But we never forgot the lessons we had learned. Every year, we held a festival to honor the spirits and remind ourselves of the importance of humility, respect, and balance. And though the whispers had stopped, we knew one thing for certain: the forest never forgets. This story reminds us that our actions have consequences, not just for ourselves, but for the world around us. Through their journey, Obinna and his friends learned about respect, humility, and balance. They realized that their actions had consequences and that they needed to honor the past to restore peace. It teaches us about the importance of harmony, respect for nature, and learning from the past. The story concludes with the village of Yumuk thriving, and the forest becoming a place of reverence rather than fear. The narrator reflects on the importance of learning from the past and respecting nature and tradition. Have you ever encountered a situation where respect for tradition or nature made all the difference? Share your thoughts or similar stories from your culture in the comments section below.